At the backyard barbecue I threw for my husband, his mother ordered me to serve their entire family like hired help. When I finally pushed back, my husband, 3 drinks deep, grabbed my arm in front of everyone and shoved me into a freezing pool while his family laughed. 15 minutes later, that laughter would turn into the worst day of his life, though it took the truth a while longer to fully catch up with him. My name is Claire Bennett. I run a small custom cake studio out of a rented commercial kitchen on the edge of Columbus. 2 years ago, I married Mason Reed, a corporate account manager with a warm laugh and a talent for making me feel like the only woman in the room. For his birthday that year, I rented a 2-story cabin outside the city, a stone fireplace, a wraparound porch, and a long table dressed in crisp white linen. I spent nearly my entire monthly income on it, and I did not regret a single cent, because I wanted him to feel like the center of the universe for one day. Before I keep going, welcome to The Revenge Tale, the channel where real family stories come out into the light. Stay with me, because what looked like one bad afternoon was actually the last domino in something that had been building quietly for years. His mother, Vivian, called before I even finished unpacking groceries, informing me she had invited 6 more relatives without asking, and that I needed imported wine and cheese nobody in that family actually ate. My budget cracked instantly, but I told myself it is one day I can survive one day. I want to be honest here, because this is the part of the story I am least proud of. I had a habit, long before that afternoon, of talking myself out of my own instincts. Every time Vivian pushed too far, I would think, maybe I am overreacting. Every time Mason folded in front of her instead of standing beside me, I told myself, he is just trying to keep the peace. I had gotten so good at explaining away small cruelties that by the time they piled up into something enormous, I almost did not recognize it as cruelty at all. I just called it marriage. By afternoon, the porch was full, and I was running between the kitchen and the yard for hours, refilling drinks, replating food, wiping down tables, while Mason accepted birthday toasts and never once looked my way. When I finally asked for help, he told me to relax and walked off with his Uncle Frank to pour another round of bourbon. Not everyone in that family was cruel that day, and I think it matters to say that clearly. Mason's Aunt Denise pulled me aside once near the drink table and said quietly, "Honey, you have been on your feet for 3 hours straight. Sit down for a minute. They can get their own drinks." I almost cried at that small kindness, but I told her I was fine, because admitting I was not fine felt, at the time, like losing. 3 moments that afternoon told me exactly where I stood in that family. The first was the tablecloths, when Vivian pulled faded, mismatched ones from her bag and laid them directly over the linens I had ironed for 2 hours, telling her sister this looked more homey. When I asked her calmly why she felt the need to undo something I had already done, she smiled at me like I was a child and reminded me my job was to make sure the guests had what they needed, not to lecture anyone on taste. The second was the cake, a 3-tier chocolate cake I had baked myself, carried out with a shaking smile, only for Vivian to take 1 bite, declare it too sweet in front of the whole table, and push her plate away just to remind everyone whose approval actually mattered in that family. The third was my business. A cousin named Tyler asked what I did for work, and when I told him about the cake studio, he laughed and compared it to his wife's knitting hobby. The table laughed along, Mason included, though he knew perfectly well my studio had out-earned his salary for the last 4 months running. I want to be fair to Mason here too, because his cruelty that day did not come from nowhere, and understanding that does not excuse it, it just explains it. Looking back, I can see the small signs I had been quietly explaining away for weeks. The extra drinks after work, the way he had started correcting me in front of his coworkers just to sound sharper than he actually felt. The tight, forced laugh whenever someone at the office out-earned him on a deal he had been chasing for months. He was a man whose ego had been slowly bruising in private. And that afternoon, in front of his whole family, with alcohol loosening whatever restraint he had left, that bruise finally split wide open, and I happened to be standing closest to it when it did. Later that evening, I told Mason I could not keep serving his relatives alone. He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and hissed at me not to embarrass him in front of his family. I pulled free and told him, loud enough for the whole porch to hear, that he was a grown man too afraid to stand up to his own mother. His face changed instantly. He turned to the crowd and announced that his wife needed some entertainment, that maybe a cold swim would fix her attitude. Most of the porch laughed. Denise did not. She said sharply, "Mason, that is enough. It is not funny. Put her down right now, but he was already moving toward me, and nobody else backed her up loud enough to stop him. His cousins blocked the porch exit, and before I could find another way out, Mason shoved me backward into the freezing above-ground pool. The cold hit like a wall, and when I surfaced gasping, blood dripped from my nose where I had clipped the edge on the way down. My phone, still in my back pocket, sank straight to the bottom, along with the only backup file I had of a corporate dessert order due at 6 the next morning, an order worth more than Mason's entire monthly paycheck. I swam to the edge and reached up, and Tyler pulled his hand away at the last second just to get one more laugh out of the crowd. Standing there soaked and bleeding while the people who claimed to love me howled, something inside me did not break. It went completely quiet, and in that quiet, for the first time in years, I stopped asking myself if I was overreacting. I walked inside, changed into dry clothes, and called my mother, Grace, who arrived within the hour, took one look at my face, and asked flatly whether she should start with Mason or with Vivian. When I told her what had happened, she did not raise her voice. She simply walked out onto that porch, looked directly at Vivian and said, "Touch my daughter again, or laugh at her one more time in front of me, and I will make sure every single person at this table remembers tonight for the rest of their lives." The porch went quiet in a way it had not been all day. Vivian opened her mouth to say I had deserved what happened, and that is when Mason, drunk and desperate to reclaim his authority in front of everyone watching, blurted out that he wanted a divorce and demanded I hand over the SUV, since at least the house was legally mine. What none of them knew, what I only found out myself 2 days later going through our joint accounts with my lawyer, was that Mason had quietly run up almost $11,000 in gambling debt over the past year, debt Vivian had been covering in small, secret pieces to protect his image in front of the very family now laughing at me. That single piece of truth explained every strange, brittle thing about that family in one breath. Why Vivian needed the party to look flawless, why Mason had been drinking more, why every small crack in his pride that day turned instantly into rage instead of shame. I did not scream or throw anything. I simply told Mason that Tyler, without realizing it, had filmed almost the entire evening on his phone trying to get content for his own page, footage that clearly showed Mason shoving me into that pool while his family laughed along. I told him I would be taking that video, along with the bruise already forming on my arm, straight to the police in the morning. Then I turned to Vivian and said only one thing. "Thank you for finally showing me exactly who your son really is," before walking upstairs, packing a single bag, and leaving with my mother without looking back. Before I tell you where things stand now, if this story has stayed with you, take a second and subscribe to The Revenge Tale. Because next week I am telling you about a family secret that stayed buried for 20 years before a single letter finally brought it into the light. What followed in the weeks after was not instant, and I think that honesty matters here. There was no single afternoon where everyone's life collapsed at once. There was a police report and a restraining order within days. There was a divorce filing within the month, made significantly stronger once my lawyer subpoenaed Tyler's video as evidence. Mason lost his job about 6 weeks later, not from one dramatic phone call, but because the assault charge became public record and his company quietly let him go during a routine review. Vivian's carefully hidden financial mess with Mason's debts came out gradually through the divorce proceedings, and she ended up selling her townhouse the following spring just to stay afloat. None of it happened overnight, and watching it unfold slowly was its own kind of justice, because I got to watch each piece land instead of hearing about it all at once and feeling like it was too easy to be real. A year later, I am not running some enormous bakery empire, and I want to be honest about that too. I am still in my same rented kitchen, though I finally hired my first part-time employee last month, a 19-year-old culinary student named Priya who reminds me a little of myself before I learned to stop apologizing for taking up space. I finished that corporate order the morning after the party anyway, soaked notebook and all, staying up until 4 in the morning rebuilding what the pool had ruined, and that client still orders from me every quarter without fail. Last week, a little girl waiting with her mother for a birthday cake pickup looked up at the display case and told me, "Your cakes make people happy," and I had to step into the back room for a minute before I could answer her, because some kindnesses land exactly when you need them most. I heard through people who still talk that Mason is working construction 2 states away, and that Vivian lives quietly with her sister now, in a much smaller house than the one she once used to remind me how small I was. I feel no joy in any of that, only a kind of steadiness I had never felt before. The night Mason pushed me into that pool, everyone standing there thought they were watching me hit rock bottom. What none of them understood is that sometimes the deepest water is exactly where you finally learn to stand on your own.